And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we begin the week the best way that we know how, and that is by talking Indiana basketball and Big Ten hoops. I'm your host, Jerod Morris, back for my first Banner Monday in a while. My thanks to Coach and to Andy for holding things down while I could not be here. A couple quick housekeeping notes off the top. As always, keep supporting our friends at homefieldapparel.com. You can use that promo code assembly20 at any time to get 20% off. Now, they often have some other deals going that if you're following them on Twitter, you might see, but that assembly20 code will always take care of you with 20% off. And if you haven't checked, they now have sweatpants made out of that bison sweatshirt hoodie material. I haven't worn them yet, but they look unbelievable. So that certainly is worth checking out. And then if you want to support your local food bank, make sure that you go to foodpantries.org or feedingamerica.org, where you will be able to find food banks in your area and how you can support them. So that's foodpantries.org or feedingamerica.org. All right, and now I'm pleased to welcome in from the Big Ten Network, from the Sporting News and Fox, one of the hardest working men in college hoops, even when there are no college hoops to cover. It is the venerable Mike DeCourcy. Mike, how are you?
Great. How are you, Jerod? The playing of that little jingle there takes on a different meaning after the last 2 months, or last month, I guess it's been.
Doesn't it? I was thinking that too when I was getting set up. Have you and I done a show since The Last Dance was on?
I don't think so.
Okay. So yeah, it does take on a little bit more meaning now. Well, I do want to talk to you about that at the end. So let's hold that thought, because I do want to get some Last Dance thoughts, since obviously that ended last night. But we actually had some big news in the world of Big Ten basketball and Indiana basketball today. I mean, it's really more of a confirmation of what we expected to happen than any kind of breaking news, but Khristian Lander is officially reclassifying to the class of 2020. He sent in his LOI. Indiana sending out press releases. They're tweeting. So this is an official thing that is happening now. And, you know, people who do preseason rankings, whether it's Gary Parrish in his top 25 and 1, he bumped Indiana up 6 spots to number 21. Bart Torvik's T-rank, when he put in all the numbers that he projects from Khristian Lander, Indiana went from 17 to 12. And I say that because that seems to be, I guess, about the consensus. This bumps Indiana up about 5 or 6 spots. What are your thoughts on what Khristian Lander's impact can be next year for Indiana?
I think the first thing is to be fair to Khristian, we don't know, like, if this were an ordinary circumstance, once Khristian had his high school diploma in hand, it would be in a drive-through window, not because of COVID, but because, he's got to get to Bloomington. So boom, grab the diploma and go and get to Bloomington and start strength training at the college level. Trying to grow a young body into a Division I body would be the first order of business. And I'm not saying that he's not in great shape, but for a high school kid, he's in great shape. But it's a different deal when you go to college. And he's a year younger than most college freshmen are. This isn't a young man who, based on what I gathered from listening to and reading Brian Snow, it's not a young man who was delayed in entering school or held back or anything like that. I mean, he's a typical high school age junior who's now going to skip his senior year and go straight to college. So you have to give him a little bit of an allowance in terms of expectation for how ready he'll be to handle the physical pounding of playing 35 Division I games. So but from a talent standpoint, he's a lot of what Indiana needs. It really has great ball handling ability, is an excellent, he still has ways to go with his accuracy. Some of that, I think, is the product of being the guy that they need to take the most shots. I think his accuracy should go up playing in a college system with a top flight point guard and an elite big guy. I think his accuracy should go up because I think the quality of his shots will go up. But from a variety, the ability to shoot from a variety of circumstances, you're not going to find many college guys coming in who can shoot the three more different ways. Step back, feint and pull back, off the catch, straight off the bounce, all those circumstances. His shot's a little low. That doesn't bother me because he showed that he knows where the defender's going to be and how to disarm the defender. He's shown that he's learned that. Now it'll be more difficult to do that to college defenders than it was to high school defenders or AAU defenders, but he understands that. I don't think the release of his shot being a little bit low is going to be a problem for him. I think he has gained an understanding of how that works for him and how to make that work for him. Goes left, goes right, just so many different ways that he can get a shot off. And that's what, to me, is the most exciting thing because, when I've watched his tape now, I see a guy who's really comfortable with a scorer's mentality. And see, how do you accommodate 2 point guards, 2 guys who need to have the ball in their hands? Well, the first thing is you need one of those 2 guys to be really comfortable scoring, because if they're 2 guys who want to just set up all the time, they step on each other. They become redundant, and I think that can be a problem. But I think having Robert with the leader and set up and make shots mentality, and another guy who can be a pure scorer because that's the role you need him to fill. I think that can work very well.
Yeah, Rob's actually been a very effective off-ball shooter in his time at Indiana. It's actually been one of the things he's been most consistent with offensively. So it'll be, obviously those guys will get some time together next year, and it'll be interesting to see how they function. I'm curious in terms of what you expect from Khristian Lander next year. I know it's really difficult to project those things, especially with just how odd this offseason is, which you alluded to. I mean, not the normal weight training, not the normal time with the team, all of that stuff. One benefit is he has played AAU with some of the guys that are on Indiana's team, so that will at least help. But to kind of provide a frame of reference, I want to think back to DJ Carton's freshman year last year at Ohio State. Now, it's different. He was a senior coming in, but he was ranked, I think, a little bit lower than where Khristian was. Khristian, I think, slotted in at number 24 in the final 24/7 rankings for this class. DJ Carton was 30 or 35 last year, a high 4-star prospect. But if you look at what he did before he left the team, there were some spectacular moments, some rough moments, like when he turned the ball over 7 times in Bloomington. But I think all told, through the games he played, he averaged about 10 points a game. He was playing roughly 24 minutes a game, about 3 assists, and about 2.5 turnovers. If I put the over-under for Khristian Lander at about 80% of that, just given that he's a year younger, what would you take?
Well, I would say over, and I think the main factor in the over and under on Khristian Lander versus DJ Carton is the over in games played. I think that's
yeah,
that's the one you want.
Because we didn't get to see how DJ Carton would have been later in the year when a guy like that you would expect to be playing his best ball. So.
Yeah, I think I think the key for Khristian is, like I said, be physically ready. I think that you won't see, you don't go in expecting to see the variance. Because DJ Carton did not struggle because his game wasn't good enough for the Division I level to be good night after night. I mean, he obviously had other concerns that kept him from being the player that he should have been. I mean, you watch the Kentucky game, and you're not expecting him to be that every night. But there were nights when he was the inverse of that. And that's not typical. I mean, guys have bad nights, but they don't go from that to being, like you said, the 7 turnovers and to being really, to really struggling. And so you would expect that Khristian would be able to come in and be reasonably consistent. And again, I think that the role definition will be different. That what Ohio State did was alternate their point guards. And I don't think that Indiana has the personnel necessarily to think that first. I think the first thing they need to think is, how do we play these 2 guys together? That's my first thought, is that will be their best team when those 2 players are playing together. So how do you play them together? And again, I think that the way to make that happen is for Khristian to be the guy that you want to be your perimeter scorer. You did that with Devontae Green a year ago. I like the idea, honestly, of having a player who you can build with and try to build the mentality the scorer's mentality within the framework that you want. I think Devontae's mentality was already pretty settled by the time that the new coaching staff got to him. And so now you get the chance to start over with a player who can do a lot of the same things physically and skill-wise that Devontae could, but that maybe will do them more within your framework.
So with Khristian Lander being added to this year's recruiting class in the final 24/7 class rankings, Indiana was second in the Big Ten. Basically, it was Michigan overall, Michigan 12th, Indiana 13th, Illinois 14th. So kind of a grouping right there of the top three in the conference. And with Lander being, I think, whatever I said, 24th or 27th overall, this now marks the third straight year that Indiana is enrolling the highest-rated recruit in the Big Ten under Archie Miller, going back to Romeo Langford 2 years ago, Trace Jackson Davis last year, and now Khristian Lander. What does that mean to you? Like, does that, obviously that's good for Indiana to have done it, although you would like to see maybe more results with those, but we didn't get to see what they would have done in the tournament last year. But what does that say about Indiana's recruiting, or inversely, what does it say about Big Ten recruiting?
Well, I think the first thing that it's important is that when you mentioned those three recruits, all three of them were Indiana kids. And when Tom Crean left the IU program, one of the principal complaints from IU fans about that regime was that too many top Indiana players were departing for other states, other schools. We could sit here and name a half dozen of them without even thinking. And that was considered to be a significant concern about the way the program was operating. And a large number of people said, why is Chris Wilkes going 3,000 miles to college? Why is Trevon Blewett going 200 miles to college? Why aren't more of those guys playing in the state of Indiana for IU? Why is Gary Harris going from my neighborhood here, up to Michigan State, and Zach Irvin from the same neighborhood up to Michigan? And all those sorts of things combined to make some IU fans uncomfortable. And now, for the third consecutive year, you have the best player in the state and one of the best players in the country choosing IU. That's a part of what you want IU basketball to be. It's not all of it, but you have to have that start in order to keep it moving. You can't, if there's no car, the car can't move. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that, I don't think that's been given enough appreciation by the fan base that has been, it's not happening fast enough. We want better results. I don't think there's been enough appreciation for that for that being part of what has been successful. And he's not the only one from this state, from this class that's enrolling at IU that are top, high school basketball prospects. He's probably the only one that would be, at the, McDonald's All-America level if he'd been around for that. But he's one of, he's another really high end prospect from the state of Indiana that's choosing IU. So I think that's really important. And in more than best in the Big Ten or whatever, I think the fact that those guys are Indiana players playing in Indiana is not given enough credence by a lot of people who say that was important to them.
In your kind of ongoing top of your head Big Ten power rankings here in the middle of the offseason as, stuff changes and ebbs and flows, does this move the needle for you? Like, does this move Indiana up, into a definitive new spot in your mind?
Well, in my mind, I kind of was thinking that he was going to be there all along. I mean, like if I were doing what Gary is doing, I would have probably already ranked under that presumption.
Gary Parrish, you mean?
Yeah. It's hard to know where to put them until I know for certain, like who's going to play at Indiana. Who's going to play at Illinois? Who's going to play at Iowa? Who's going to play at Michigan State? It's really hard. I know what I expect. I expect Luka Garza to be back with the Hawkeyes. I expect Michigan State to probably go 1-1, but I don't know. I mean, things happen. So, and I also don't know when the process is going to end now with with the date being pushed back, I don't know when anybody's going to know who's going to play in college next year and who's going to try their luck in the NBA. So I think I had Indiana always as a borderline, top, basically a top 30 team, somewhere in that range. And I think they still have some things to prove, especially at the defensive end, before I'm comfortable saying they're a lock top 25 team.
Did we learn anything this week that gives us more insider knowledge about whether we're going to have a college basketball season that begins on schedule? I mean, I think we all at this point are kind of bracing for the very real possibility the games could be played without fans. But did we learn anything from some of the other sports or what the NCAA did that gives us any more insight on what the schedule might look like?
I mean, I think that more schools than not are leaning toward enrolling their students on campus in the fall in some fashion. Now, that doesn't mean maybe 100%, but I think that it appears that's the way this is going. They all know what it would mean for them from a negative standpoint to not do that. And so absent a massive revival of the virus, I think that's the direction we're going to go. And I've always maintained, if there are students on campus going to class, living in dorms, there are going to be football games and cross-country meets and whatever, and soccer games, et cetera. And there will be a question of in what form the audience will be. But I've never doubted that if the students are on campus, that they're going to play. It'd be so destructive to college athletics in just about every school to not have a football season. Certainly every high major school to not have a football season be so destructive that in many ways college athletics will, as we know them, might not be able to endure. I mean, and when I say as we know them, I mean like full-fledged college athletic programs. We're going to have college football and basketball, women's basketball, probably women's volleyball. We're going to have all those games, soccer, women's soccer. We'll have them for, forever, for as long as we're around. But the broad-based program, if we don't have a football season in the 2020-2021 academic year, I think that becomes a complete luxury. And so I know they all know that. So they're going to do everything they can to play it. And the idea of pushing it back, just to push it back, and maybe it'll be safer then. I think that they understand that it contains a whole another risk, because if you push it back from the fall and then you get to the end of fall without any real incidents, so to speak, and then something happens in January, February, and then and then all of a sudden you can't play in the spring. I mean, they can't afford that. So I think that I expect that, again, unless something happens that we aren't anticipating now, that there will be students on campus in most places, and that there will be intercollegiate sports in all the places that don't have students. That do have students. I don't know we know the California state institutions, which San Diego State, Fresno State, Cal State Fullerton, schools like that, will not have on-campus students. We know that. We don't know what they'll do about that athletics in that circumstance. They haven't decided. That's not the Pac-12. A lot of people might immediately assume Cal, UCLA, they're not involved in that. They have to make, the University of California has to make its decisions about its campuses. I've had people tell me there's no way they're not doing what the Cal States do. I don't necessarily buy that. I think they'll do whatever is prudent and whatever they're allowed to do by their government. We don't know yet what that will be.
So I want to turn our attention now for the rest of the time that we have to talking about The Last Dance, which obviously ended last night. Just a great sports documentary, flawed in many ways, but just a lot of fun. And especially for those of us, who were around when Michael Jordan was at his apex, to be able to go back and kind of relive those moments was was really enjoyable. And you wrote a column today that I feel like was written to directly address the internal debate that I've been having with myself this morning since watching that last night. Because, you watch the end of that Utah Jazz game and, just how it felt like they were hanging on by a thread. I mean, Dennis Rodman's going out and wrestling in between games. Scotty's back is hurt. Michael just has to do everything there at the end to win this game. And you're like, man, I mean, there is no way. It almost feels like they couldn't have won another game, just the way that it felt. And yet then you see Michael at the end saying, heck yeah, we wanted to come back and go for a 7th title. And I've kind of been debating with myself, like, you know what, that was the perfect ending. It was only going to mess it up if they came back again. That was great. But it was Michael, and the thing is, like, if you grew up then, I mean, I was 11 through 16, 17, as he's going through that. I mean, you really came to a point with Michael Jordan where you just believed he would come through no matter what every single time. And so it's hard when you put yourself back in that feeling to feel like if they came back that he wouldn't have found a way to do it. And yet logically, when you actually rationally look at it as you did, it seems very unlikely. So can you help settle? I know what you're going to say, but maybe for other people who are having the same internal debate as me, help add some rationality to it.
Well, I think the first thing that you have to remember is that Michael could achieve a lot, and a lot. There was always the feeling like he could get anything done. But remember, on the front end of his career, he was fantastic. I mean, he came out of the block averaging 30 plus points a game. So there was never any question that he was phenomenal from the word go. I remember the 63-point game. That was in his second year. And that alone wasn't enough. I mean, the Celtics were still better. Now, there wasn't a Celtics of the 80s by the time, not the 99 season came around. The Spurs, who were the eventual NBA champions, were a very, very good team. They would have been a 60-win team in a full NBA season. That was a strike-shortened season, which actually would have helped Michael and Scotty. But first of all, you would have had to get to take Scotty, who had played the entirety of the dynasty years under a contract that was vastly undervaluing him. He signed it willingly. It wasn't, but he wanted the long-term extension because he wanted the security. But by the time he got to the end, the money had gotten so much bigger. And there was, that year, the offseason between the Last Dance and the Spurs championship year, that year, Matt Geiger signed for $8 million a year, give or take. And so, what was Scottie Pippen worth in that atmosphere? Well, you would have been asking him to come back for a figure that, unless Michael was willing to completely eliminate his salary, he made 32, 33, something like that in the Last Dance year. He would have had to basically forfeit that. Was he willing to do that? He never said that. He never said I played for nothing. It would have probably taken that. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know whether that was even have been allowed. I'm not sure whether they would have allowed to give him a pay cut like that. But let's just assume that he would take it. Well, okay, so now you have him and Scotty. Then you have, on the other hand, the front court of Dennis Rodman and Luke Longley. Dennis, the following year, after the Bulls waived him, nobody wanted him. He sat there for a month. And then finally the Lakers signed him. They offered him $1 million for what was left of the season. It would have been about, I think it was around 40 games or maybe 35 by the time he signed. He lasted less than 2 months. They didn't want him anymore. And that was a team with championship ambition. And he was averaging, I think, 11 rebounds a game. But he was completely incorrigible again. Kobe Bryant was quoted as saying he was constantly late. And Kobe was like in his second or third year, and he knew that Dennis wasn't serious anymore. Would he have been with the Bulls? Maybe. Did he have any gas left in the tank? They didn't think he did. And he ended up playing, I think, 23 games that year and 12 the following year, and that was it. He was done. Longley went to Phoenix. They traded, and they actually got the Ron Artest out of the deal. Artest was the draft pick that they got. The number draft pick was around 15 or 16 in whatever draft it was, and they got Artest out of it. So it was a pretty good deal on the other end. And Longley went down to Phoenix and wasn't even in their rotation when they went in the playoffs. Well, I shouldn't say he wasn't in the rotation. He wasn't at the front of their rotation. He averaged, I think, 16 minutes a game in a 3-game playoff sweep that they lost. So just not much there. So you're asking Michael and Scotty to basically win it on their own. And they were phenomenal together. And the other thing, I mean, Scotty, even if he had taken the money, if they'd given him the money to stay and he'd taken it, Scotty declined as well. I mean, Scotty never had another year like the Last Dance year. He was never a great player again. He was still a very good player most of the time, but he was never great again. And I don't know how much of that was physical and how much of that was circumstantial, but he was not. And Steve Kerr, who had been a great player, a very significant player on the last 3 championship teams, he went to San Antonio, and they were the team that won the title. Barely a rotation player in that title year for San Antonio. Hardly got off the bench in the playoffs. So when you look at all that, I mean, the time was up, and they didn't have salary cap money because of MJ and presumably Scotty to go out and chase free agents. And there just wasn't enough in the system at that point. Now, do I think that Krause made a mistake? I think that yes and no, because I think in forcing out Jackson, and Jackson wanted to leave unless they were going to be a championship contender. That's a truth, but I think they went about it in the wrong way. And also in deciding that, that rather than give your business, you're looking at this from a pure sports perspective. That's the way Jerry saw it. Okay. I'm looking strictly between the lines, and you're in the entertainment business. You can't tell your customers, sorry, it's over. The league has to tell you it's over. The competition has to tell you it's over. And I understand there are business considerations to that, but all of that has to be competition driven. It can't strictly be a dollars and cents thing. You can't put yourself in a deep hole giving Scotty another long-term contract, now this time for real money, but you can give him a couple of years at a high salary figure and keep him around as you transition to your rebuild. You can't tell me Scottie Pippen isn't somebody that you want in a rebuild. And you can't tell me that. I mean, too much a high character player, too much of a winner, a great defender. That's always going to stay with him. You have him and Kukoc and Michael, maybe you pull off a miracle. So from the standpoint of basketball, Krause was right. They probably weren't going to win it again. And from a standpoint of money, Reinsdorf was probably right. It was going to cost them more to try to pull it off than it was going to be worth. But from the standpoint of customer relations, they were both egregiously wrong. You have to give those guys another lap if they want it. Now, if they come to you and say, look, we're done. If Michael had said, I don't have any gas left in the tank, I'm out of here, then that would be a different story. But clearly that was never Mike's intent. His intention was not to retire after 98. He did it because he felt forced to. I still think if you're Michael Jordan, you can force them to deal with you more so. I think he made it too easy on them by saying, if Phil's not here, I'm not here. I think he should have said, no, I want to come back, and you're going to have to cut me. I think that's what he should have said.
Was the experience of watching this just an entertaining trip down memory lane for you, or did you learn something from watching it?
I'm not sure. I think in that period, I was covering college basketball on a 365-day basis then. That was when I was working in Cincinnati and doing sporting news on the side. So I watched a lot of those games, certainly watched the finals, but I didn't watch it as, I was involved in draft coverage and this and that. So I probably didn't watch it, every play or whatever. So, I would say that it showed me things that I didn't remember seeing. that I didn't remember. I mean, obviously, once you got to the finals, I probably saw most of that and remembered that. So it was it was interesting to see Michael do the things that he did and know that in any era he would have been incredible. I mean, I'm sure you've seen on Twitter from time to time people saying, he wouldn't have been that good in this era, because they play defense differently now. But I mean, Michael was just amazing. I mean, just an absolute artist. And, I feel privileged to have seen him the handful of times that I did. And I don't resent him, by the way, for the time that my wife had always wanted to see him play. So the last game of, I think it was 91. I think it was 91. I don't think it was 92. I think it was 91. One of those 2 years, either 91 or 92. They played at Cleveland. I picked up my wife like 5 o'clock on the dot from her job. We drove to Richfield Coliseum. I think we stopped at a McDonald's drive-through. Get there, are pulling into the parking lot at 7:30. I don't remember what. I think it was around 7:25, and the tip was at like 7:35 or something like that. And when we pull into the parking lot and have the cab station on, they announced that MJ not only is not playing because the Bulls have already clinched whatever there is to clinch. He's not even in the building.
Oh, geez.
So all that, and he wasn't even there. So I'm not bitter about that. He was an amazing player to watch. And like I said, I feel privileged to have been able to see him as much as I did.
And of course, the greatest, well, I mean, actually, there were a few, Indiana related moments in the doc because there was a lot of Isaiah Thomas in there, but that wasn't always positive for Isaiah. But the part that really stuck with Indiana fans is when they showed Bob Knight after coaching Michael Jordan in the 1984 Olympics. This was before he had played in the NBA, and Bob Knight said he was the greatest basketball player that he'd ever seen, which was pretty incredible foresight from a guy who obviously knew talent.
I do remember that. And I remember at the time, like, I think if you asked anyone who followed basketball then, especially with the way the game was played, I think everyone understood why Houston took Hakeem, even though they already had Ralph. I think everyone understood it. He was an incredible big man, and the big men ruled the game then. But Portland taking Bowie, everybody knew that was a bad pick. Not just because Michael was there, which was a huge part of it, but also because, I mean, the guy had missed 2 college seasons. I mean, everybody knew it. Like, how Portland ever thought that was a good idea? Like, if there was nobody else that could play, like, if you'd taken the number 2 pick in this draft and you got a shot at Sam Bowie, I might roll the dice. The 2020 draft, I might even take 52-year-old Sam Bowie or whatever he is now, the 58-year-old. But man, I mean, passing up Mike to take a guy who had his injury issues, no. No one in America thought that was a smart move then.
No. Well, Mike, we always appreciate you coming on with us, lending your insight. I was glad to be back for this one, and we'll look forward to continuing to do this throughout the offseason.
Sounds great, Jerod. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mike. The great Mike DeCourcy join us here on Banner Monday, as he always does. Fun conversation with Mike. We will have another episode of Assembly Call Radio, as we always do, coming up on Thursday. Hope you'll join us for that. I wonder what the banner moment might be. Yeah, I think I have a pretty good idea what it might be after. Although I will say, if something can rival Khristian Lander's reclassification becoming official, then that would mean it would be a pretty good week for Indiana basketball. But we'll talk about that. Talk about some other stuff. Haven't figured out a good topic. By the way, if you have off-season topics that you want us to address, always let me know. Obviously, if you're in the community, assemblycall.com/community, you can let us know in there. But email me, Jerod@assemblycall.com, or send me a tweet. Well, obviously, we'll start doing our player-by-player, off-season breakdown that we always do. But if there's anything else that you think would be fun for us to tackle, let me know. All right, thanks for being here live. If you're watching live, thanks for listening on the podcast, and we will talk to you on Thursday night. See you, everybody.